This is probably some of the worst financial record keeping that I've seen. So it's a bit of a head scratcher why some of these most basic elements were just not done this time around.
Our government has made the decision to stop investing in new road infrastructure.
I just told you that I should have been more specific in that statement.
I want to put it to Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, if they do not come through with their commitment, if they break their promise by March 1st, there will be consequences.
Okay, so it was a busy week here in Ottawa politics with a scathing report from the Auditor General, an environment minister who can't pick a lane, and a looming showdown over Pharmacare. It all quickened the pulse of Canadian politics, and we're going to break it down with our party insiders. Now, she's outside of town today, but Melanie Richer is here. She's a former communications director for the NDP. And here with me in town, in studio, Craig McEachern, former Liberal ministerial staffer, and Fred Delory, former Conservative campaign manager. Happy Friday. Good to see you, gang. Mel, welcome back after a week away. Let's start with you, and let's start with that clip we ended on there. You want to talk about pharma? Jagmeet Singh is talking tough. I can't tell if it's a real threat or not. Translate NDP for me, please.
Yeah, for sure. I do think it's a real threat. I do think, from the sounds of conversations in public and also conversations in private, the NDP is really reaching its limit with the Liberal government. And I would say reaching the limit because they're starting to see that the Liberal government is not willing to meet them where they think we need to go in order to help people in a real way. So I think we're seeing that play out obviously this week in what Jagmeet has said and what other MPs have said. And I think really we've got less than 2 weeks now to see if the Liberals are going to show up. What I thought was interesting, and I think we talked about this a few weeks ago, that there was mention of, okay, well, what essential medications can we cover? If there does seem to be some of those, background conversations that are halted because they're not meeting at the same spot, well, what essential medications can we start covering and when can we start seeing those? So, we saw birth control this week. We saw, a suite of coverage for folks living with diabetes. So that to me is also signaling of moving the needle and them plain as day saying we can go back to vote per vote, which is not what the Liberal government wants. It's trickier in the House because it means that you're having to negotiate, on a per item basis, and they may have to work with the Bloc, like we're seeing may happen on Pharmacare or even with the Conservatives. So I think we're seeing a leader and a caucus that is at its limit. And they're really putting it to Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. Are you going to work with us to help people, or are you going to make us walk away because you're not holding your end of the bargain? I think is what we saw this week in a really real way.
So Greg, I've been reaching out to Liberals to get a sense of their level on the panic meter, and I'm not sensing any. They seem to think it's going okay, and we have Don Davey saying we've come to an agreement on a lot. He's the NDP lead negotiator. I know what's outstanding, and the things that are outstanding to me are not unreachable issues. So how do we reconcile the lack of Liberal concern, the lack of concern from Davies with the obvious concern from Jagmeet Singh?
Yeah, last Friday, in case this topic came up, I did have conversations with similar folks. Nothing's changed from their point of view on the Liberal side that, this still continues to go on. And I think what's problematic is the fact that you just, question whether or not this is serious. Your media panel just questioned this. If there are questions whether or not this is serious or this is just posturing, that's not a good sign. I think back to what Ed Broadbent said about the deal and that the deal should have been a year shorter.
Yeah.
I look at that a little bit differently. If it was going well for the NDP, he wouldn't probably have said that. He would probably want it to go longer. The problem for the NDP and for Mr. Singh on this is that they have had trouble trying to take credit for the good work that they've done. And I think part of it is hurt by when Mr. Singh says things about the concerns that have been raised about how this might affect our credit rating at a very crucial time for our economy. He said something to the effect of, well, that's just additional steps or additional explanations. Well, the top title for this panel is often, if you're explaining, you're lost. So I don't think that gives people a lot of comfort that we could just somehow explain this away. I think there's NDP members or members of Parliament that want to be the conscience of Parliament, but I think there's a lot more that actually want to achieve things, and this is the way you do it.
Fred, what's your take on how this has played out?
I think Jagmeet Singh has two issues. He has internal issues with the caucus that I think really enjoy being in opposition and fighting the government. And then he has external forces where NDP voters are like, what the heck's going on? At the end of the day, there's a deal done. I think this is all posturing. We're going to see something come right at the last minute, and he's going to try to take credit for something, and deservedly so in this case. He'll be the champion for this. He's going to try to own this issue for months and years on end that he delivered it. So he has to put this work in now, because if it's just something that, if he accepted the deal and doesn't make a drama of it, then they're not going to get the political win that they want to get.
Mel, I don't know if the guys are being brave just because you're not here, but they seem to disagree with you. And help me reconcile the Don Davies optimism with the Jagmeet Singh defiance, right? How do I reconcile those two things? Because they seem to be going in opposite directions.
Right, and I understand why that, the fact that they're saying two different things is maybe a little bit confusing, especially to folks watching at home. I think I've heard since December that they see Pharmacare and when I say they, I mean the NDP and the Liberals see Pharmacare very differently. The NDP is really pushing for a universal system, and the Liberals don't want that. And I think that is what is actually playing out in negotiations. I think the NDP wants to show that they will walk if the Liberals don't kind of meet them halfway there. And so I do hear what Greg and Fred said. I think I take this very seriously. I think that Jagmeet, from the very beginning has said he's doing this because he wants to make people's lives better. If he is out there saying those things, I would be pretty confident that he's ready to walk if they're not able to meet halfway there.
Okay. All right. Well, we've got, 14, 15 days. We'll find out on March 1st where this is going unless it's done beforehand. So mixed messaging, Greg. Theme of the week, potentially, especially if you're a Liberal in Ottawa right now. There's a lot of concerns about how some things played out this week. I'm hearing a lot of anxiety from various Liberals. What are you hearing about how this week went?
So when I worked in politics, I'm obviously from Nova Scotia, but I worked in Ottawa. I worked for an MP from Newmarket Aurora, an MP from Winnipeg. We tend to be, a collective that you stay in touch. And I'm hearing from a lot of Liberal friends, basically, I'd like to say WTF, but I think that's inappropriate.
That was taken this week, yeah.
And I didn't have a T-shirt ready to go. But people are asking whether or not how much the Liberals really want to win. And we're talking about the elected Liberals. This week, the much anticipated rebrand of the carbon rebate was stepped on by Stephen Guilbeault's musings about big highway projects. And there's an explanation. We've already talked about what happens when you're explaining. I'm from Nova Scotia. I just drove over last fall a new piece of divided highway that Fred and I would be quite familiar with. That was a very dangerous section of highway. Mm-hmm. I remember when the highway was twinned in New Brunswick. So I internalize that. I hear that from that point of view. I'm not thinking about some bun fight you're having with the Premier of Quebec. And this is why I think members of Cabinet especially have to be aware of the impact if they're imprecise in their language. When I worked for the Martin government, we were in a rough year of 2005. Our polls weren't great. I was a director of communications at Treasury Board. Our overall boss was Scott Reed at PMO. And he said 3 words to us: do no harm.
Yeah.
And it was about, think about the impact of what you're about to do. Rob Oliphant, Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs, another example. So this week, Liberals are asking me, where are our folks? Because we're playing defense all the time, and the defense is on our own goals.
Yeah, Fred, this was the Guilbeault story this week. I saw it in the Montreal Gazette and immediately sent it out. We have an internal email system. I said, this is going to be a thing. Because I had no idea the Government of Canada was no longer going to invest in roads, because that's the way it sounded. The clarification was taken out of context. I was talking about big projects like this one, and then later clarified, not big projects like this one, just this one project in Quebec City. But it became a thing that just took over the whole day. And you've been reveling in the attack ads the Liberals keep giving the Conservatives. This feels like another one this week.
Well, I said a few weeks ago that Ken McDonald was my favorite Liberal MP. I'd like to change that. Stephen Guilbeault is my favorite Liberal MP. What he said here and the way it's going to be clippable, it's absolutely devastating. And to the example Greg used, Sean Fraser in 2015 ran against me and championed that issue and helped deliver that. And it's something now
Promise made, promise kept.
No more promises on roads, though, right? Going to the next election now, rural roads and across this country, the government seems to be out of it. Today, our Premier Houston wrote a letter asking clarity on this because they have major projects with the government of Canada, and they need clarity now. Are these all being pulled?
Yeah, and Mel, Tim Houston, a progressive conservative, though not having a great relationship with this government at all times, not a hostile one like Daniel Smith, who jumped on this. Doug Ford jumped on this, but David Eby got worried about this. Like, you're even upsetting New Democrats with this sort of sloppy language right now. I mean, what do you make of what happened this week on this one?
Yeah, so infrastructure is really important, right? The roads we drive on are important. So to kind of hear, and I think probably, I can't speak for Premier Eby, but probably comes out of nowhere, right? This isn't something that we've had a discussion about before. And the minister's press conference, the language he was using was just so messy and hard to really understand where he was going. It kind of felt like an attack, but then also not one. So the fact that in itself and the way that he talked about it was super confusing, that he had to retract, I think was not well received from both friends at the Premier's table, but also foes at the Premier's table. And I'll just pick up on something that Greg said earlier of the do no harm. Yeah. I think this could be something that, a good week for the Liberals, and instead it was just very chaotic, very messy, and really the thing that we've been saying on this panel, I think all three of us for months now, is the message coming out of the Liberals, or what is it forward to give to people, is lost a little bit. The proactiveness is lost a little bit, and I think we saw a little bit more of that this week with Minister Guilbeault.
But we got a news release at 10:14 a.m. this morning from Infrastructure Canada, Greg. Improvements to local roads will benefit islanders and their businesses, with work taking place thanks to the combined investments of $21.4 million from the federal and Prince Edward Island government. Lawrence McCauley is losing your war on roads. But to your point, this stomped all over the carbon rebate rebrand to a carbon rebate. How do they turn this around? Because this was a rough week.
So I have some sort of understanding, perhaps what was going to happen on Wednesday, that when this broke in the morning, fairly early, that the plan might have been for the Prime Minister to speak and clarify it in question period, because on Wednesdays he handles the bulk of the questions. Right. And thankfully that was stopped, because you know what, there's too much. The Prime Minister, I think, touches too many things, and the buck has to stop with the ministers sometime. And again, I think they put Guilbeault out, and at that point, no other really message was going to come out, but why should someone else clean up your mess? The challenge for this is, I remember in 2009 with Mr. Ignatieff, there came a point where Liberals started to get so frustrated. You saw a lot of leaks, a lot of anger, and basically he had to do a wholesale change of his office as leader of the Liberals. Right. It's not at that point, but I certainly, feel the frustration of the people, the rank and file Liberals who knock on doors, put up lawn signs, are starting to wonder, do they care more about this than some of the elected folks?
Yeah, that's a bad spot to be as a political party. Fred, Greg says the buck has to stop with ministers. Your topic is we don't know where the bucks have stopped, right, and how many bucks there actually are. You want to talk about GC strategies. Right.
ArriveCan is another way to talk about it. And the $250 million that went to this small company of two people that seemed to work out of their basement. Now, I know they existed, the company existed and had government contracts before the Liberals came in 2015, but it exploded under the Liberals, the number of contracts they got. And the fact that I read today, the PCO said they've suspended all contracts with them and no further contracts going. Major red flag. So something is going on here, right? It's not like there was an action. They can't defend this now. There's something very serious here. And, we talked about a lot of other issues today. This could be the most serious that really hurts this government.
Yeah, a couple of things. The $250 million in contracts, that's what a bunch of journalistic organizations, including us here, got from this public disclosure registry that we're now told is inaccurate. Because, Mel, if a contract is, say, awarded in January, but then amended in March and then refined in June, it will appear in the database 3 times. And so the contract counts 3 times towards the tally. Why that exists that way, I have no idea. It doesn't seem like very effective proactive disclosure, but it's still tens of millions of dollars, as Fred points out. A assistant deputy minister has been suspended without pay. A director general has been suspended without pay. That is a very rare thing in this town, Mel, for civil servants of that level to be suspended and dollar amounts of this level to be unaccounted for. How problematic is this, do you think?
Totally. The sheer amount of money that went into this program, and nobody's able to point to what exactly it went to, what these bills that taxpayers are paying for went to. The fact that to your point, there are civil servants that look like they were involved, that they were getting taken out to dinner or whatnot. How does that play into it? The story just seems almost right out of a movie of, you know, the reason that some people are cynical about the way that politics or the way that government works, I think is very problematic. Now the tie it to the Prime Minister, I think there's still an argument that the opposition has to do there to actually be effective in that argument. I think for the most part, at least when you're reading it, you're like, oh my God, this seems super sketchy, but I don't see how, you know, the minister made this decision or the Prime Minister made this decision. I think that's going to come. But the everything that you're seeing being reported on this story does not smell good, does not look good, and that can't help but make this communication issue that the government has worse, or make them have to answer on something that they really shouldn't and wouldn't really want to be talking about.
Yeah, and Greg, like that dollar amount is somewhere between the 56 million and the 250 million. We just don't know exactly where, because for some reason that is not easy to find out. But this hasn't been linked directly to any politician. It's still in the bureaucracy based on what we've seen so far. I don't know if a competence issue is better than a corruption issue for the Liberals right now. But neither one seems like a good option on this one, right?
Yeah, and if you're in a bad spot in politics, media loves a theme. Whether if it was on its own, perhaps not. I mean, full credit, Bill Curry from the Globe and Mail has been on it for a long time, and you could be following this thread for quite a while. Yep. I think, to Fred's point about the suspension of contracts, I think that actually happened in November. Mm-hmm. So I think there have been things in the works. I mean, if I recall, I think January of 23, Bill Curry had a story on this. And so if you're smart and in government, you've been following this for a while. There's also been some things around that this was discussed at a committee and they decided to back off, which says to me, it makes me ask the question, are there some investigations here? But yeah, it's absolutely bad. I can tell you, though, as somebody who has worked on things where you've brought things to government, I found quite often the reaction was, the bureaucracy wanted to build it themselves. So on this one, there are a lot of flags and questions that this, happened so quickly. The app works. I've used it. I think that other people have found it to be good. I just don't know if it was ever needed to be that amount.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend the Liberals focus on the efficacy of the app. But, Fred, to Greg's point, the OGO, as it's called, the Government Operations Committee, it got a report from the CBSA, an internal report, and the non-conservative parties on the committee shut it all down because they said this is scary stuff, to quote a Liberal, and they didn't want to interfere with the investigation. So final 20 seconds to you on where this goes, potentially.
Well, at the end of the day, it's a Liberal government right now.
Yeah.
The buck does stop with them. They're in charge of this. If there's anything that's wrong here, it happened under their watch.
Yeah, and we've got the Auditor General has done her work. The RCMP is doing its work. The CBSA has done some work, and we'll have to wait and see what is made available to us. All right, gang, we got to leave it there. It's good to have you back, Mel. Thanks so much. Greg McEachern, Fred Delory, Melanie Richer. Thanks, gang.